welcome to Green Justice. I'm Greg, one of your co-hosts. I'm here with
Mark Vardy
and
Paula Hirschman.
And today we have an exciting interview with Dale Tracy, faculty in the English department at KPU, who's also a leader in the Climate Plus Challenge. All right, so we're here today with Dale Tracy, who's going to tell us about the Climate Plus Challenge. Welcome, Dale, to Green Justice. It's great to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, just to start us off, could you tell us a bit about the Climate Plus Challenge and, the history of it and, what the focus is?
Yeah, so the history is it started with Ellen Pond, and she had this idea with the Climate Plus Challenge and started bringing in a few people like Tracy Sherlock. Leo was no longer here. And then eventually it grew to the point that the provost's office was supporting it with some course releases. And there were some interviews. And now there are several of us from different disciplines working to get more teaching and learning about climate at KPU. So we're focused on not just in the classroom, faculty, staff, and students. And the plus is recognizing that climate change entails inequities, both in the creation of it and in the sufferings that come from it. So we're focused on that broad idea of climate and enhancing the conversations about it at KPU.
Right. So is the plus, does that kind of stand in for justice? Because we hear about climate justice as a way of kind of unfolding those broader inequities. Is that kind of what you have in mind with the plus side?
Yeah, definitely. And so I think that links well with your podcast today.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And can I ask just another quick follow-up question? Because I know from looking at the website that part of the whole Climate Plus Challenge is listing courses where climate change is taught, so students can know where they can go on the KPU campus in a variety of different disciplines to learn about climate change.
That's correct. And that is very helpful to us to have faculty make that commitment, I guess, but also the public promotion of it for students and also for us to understand how many people are signing on to the challenge, we could say, people who are invested in climate and saying, yes, I am teaching that in my class. So that's ongoing. And anybody listening could sign up.
Great, yeah.
Okay, so we're also wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your collaborative creations project.
I just realized we should probably say that Dale is the coordinator, right? Like you're currently the coordinator for the Climate Plus Challenge?
Our terminology is confusing. We are all leads. And then Christina Shorthouse and I were co-coordinators. And so I was the lead in spring, and then she took over. And then she had got a real momentum going, and we decided it would be best not to keep switching back and forth, which is a bit of a institutional difficulty. And so she's continuing in her lead role.
Okay.
And she's also working with the UN SDG.
The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes. And so those two things work really well together. So right now she's coordinating or helping to coordinate the UN SDG week that's coming up. And there'll be a lot of good events for that too if this podcast is out by then.
Yes. And so the reason I wanted to interject before I got to Paula's question is just so listeners know that the Climate Plus Challenge involves a lot of different projects.
Yeah.
And that you're involved as the lead or the lead at various times in helping coordinate the entire project. But then this second question that Paula just asked you about the collaborative creations, listeners should know that that's your own kind of like individual project that you do as an individual faculty member, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that context. Yes. So with my time with the Climate Plus Challenge, one of the things I'm doing is this collaborative creations project. And I guess I'll start with my initial inspiration from a decade ago, which is where I met Mark. In Kingston, Ontario, I had just finished my PhD at Queen's, and I was working there as a sessional. And I saw a poster from Tracy Guptill, a master's student in environmental sciences and drama. And she was looking for people who would help her to devise a play, which would be her master's project. And so it was community members, faculty, and students. It was open to not just people at Queen's, but broadly. And I found it so inspiring to be able to think in new ways with people. It just gave us structure and a pattern to our interactions that was so different from anything I had encountered before. And so I've kept that with me, and it's, I think, informed a lot of what I've done. And so that was the model I was working from for this collaborative creations project. I've suggested that together people at KPU could devise a play about climate plus. And so that each collaborative creation session would formulate material, which we could then later use to create a play. But also, and more importantly for me, would be a rhythm of interaction that is unusual, that isn't entirely goal-oriented. Even though I had this idea of the play at the end, I don't care if it happens that much. Like if we don't end up with a play, that's not a big deal, because for me, it's more like having a horizon helps us structure what we're doing together now. And if we don't ever get there, we've still done all this thinking and being together. So each session involved different theater games, mainly from Augusto Boal's Games for Actors and Non-Actors, and just other creative methods that allowed us to have time to talk and also make things together.
That sounds really rich, really rich and generative. Yes, I know that the experience at Queen's University that you're referring to with Tracy Guptill, like that was such a kind of a non-cognitive way of engaging with climate change. And that's what I really appreciated about it. It was like basically like, here's a bunch of people who are interested in climate change and, trying to address it, but in a very like creative and sort of free form, ground up, experiential, using your body, using your voice, using creativity and arts to kind of engage with it. And it was like a very, productive and terrific experience. So I'm really happy that you've brought that with you to KPU.
Especially when we think of like so much of the discourse, right? When the last podcast we did was on Oxford kind of studies and the science of climate change and how that works. And there's so much of the orientation that we get in the mainstream is scientific, right? It's a cognitive in a certain, rationalistic way. And then that tends to be so pessimistic, right? Because the science, like the science, although there's ambiguity there, right? The science is it's so despairing in terms of its outcome. So I think just to me anyway, the possibility to approach things in a broader, more holistic and more artistic way could offer potential. I mean, how do you see that potential manifesting as broader change in the world? I know that's a big question to put on, but how does it connect kind of social change, do you think?
I think that a really big problem we face is a lack of imagination. We often have solutions and we don't manage to enact them. And so what can we do to get ourselves in a better position to do what we actually can and know that we can do? I think that the imagination is a big problem. I thought this already, but then reading John Valiant's Fire Weather and just seeing him break down the non-action of the officials in the face of a massive fire emergency, because it was so much worse than anybody had ever experienced or could imagine happening. And so they could see it with their own eyes. They could see it coming. And they knew with their expertise what could happen, but they didn't act. And I think that failure of imagination to grapple with something worse or different than we've experienced before, it terrifies me actually, that's the case, that we actually have to overcome all these factual scenarios around us, but also overcome our own limitations in our minds. And I think that we can only do that working together. Like for me, working with my body is not easy. I have that cognitive, by myself, intellectual, rational, I think I was trained to do that, and I'm good at being trained, and I'm a good student, and I can do that kind of thing, and I feel pretty comfortable. I'm not very comfortable like rolling around on the floor like we did with Tracy Guptill a few times. Like just
it was kind of gonzo theater games, right? Like think about like improv theater games. Like it was just like, that's what was so awesome. Yeah, it did literally involve rolling around the floor and just like just freak out in whatever way you want to freak out.
Yeah.
within certain boundaries, of course.
Right.
And that's not something that comes easily to me. But I think that because I did that, I was able to think better because I've overcome some limitations in my own thought by working with other people and seeing how they approach something and feeling what it feels like to come to solutions, because we'd set questions and we come up with, we work through possible answers to them, to do that with other people and integrate all those different ideas into one bigger thing. It felt really different from what I was doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking at I was thinking about the questions that we have several students who are working with us on this project. And one of them came up with like a list of questions that are really great. And the first question that she came up with actually kind of speaks directly to this point. So this is a question from our student Aramayis, which is, how do you navigate the challenge of balancing students' climate anxiety with the need for empowerment? As an instructor dealing with climate change in the classroom, there's a lot of climate anxiety, right? And so how do you work with that and sort of get to a place where students feel empowered and not sort of dwelling in that anxiety?
So this is the balance to what I just said. I think it's really important to work with other people outside of your comfort zone. I also think it's really important that you have the opportunity to contribute what you have to contribute. Like, everybody has their strengths and the things that they're just really great at doing or that are really curious about. Being good at something isn't what's important. Being curious about it, I think, is more. So with my students this year, I taught a Canadian drama course in the fall, and I'm teaching a modern contemporary drama course now. My students participated in Climate Change Theatre Action Festival, which meant that we performed a 5-minute play about climate change that the festival provided, and then we had to create a conversation or some kind of climate action around it. For one of the assignments for the class, I asked the students to sign up to contribute to making the play, being in the play, or making the discussion or being in the discussion in the role that they felt they could best contribute. And then I'm doing a similar thing right now where we're actually devising a play in response to the plays we're reading. I created a bunch of different roles, all things that would contribute to us achieving this project together, and asked students to also add on roles if there's something they're good at, curious about, that they could totally fail at, they've never tried before. Maybe they're actually not good at it at all, but they just want to try it and want to learn more about it because that part isn't graded. And so I think providing the opportunity for students to try things that they want to be part of how they can be in the world without that being something that I'm directly assessing, to contribute to a group effort so that they can see, like, I have something to contribute, and look, there it is. We did that together, and I was part of that. I was part of making that happen with whatever it is that I have to bring to the world.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, because this is, I was getting sidetracked by going into the website to read where you wrote about this on the Climate Plus Challenge blog. And this, part of like the Climate Change Theatre Action 2023, right? So that's what you're talking about here.
And that's annual. So that's something someone else could do if they wanted to next time.
And I was just noticing that it is inspired by Octavia Butler, who is a science fiction author of high regard and very well regarded, high repute. Is that a word?
Yes.
All good things must begin. And I think that is a really important phrase or way of thinking about this issue of anxiety and empowerment. All good things must begin. So you have to start something, and there's a certain vulnerability because you don't know where it's going to lead, and you might be out of your comfort zone. It may, ultimately not end up in producing. And we're so kind of trained and thinking in this world that you have to be productive and always having it an achievable end where you can say, hey, look what I've done. But sometimes it's just the process of trying and experimenting that is valuable in and of itself.
Yes, I told the students that we might fail. Like, it might be a bad play, or maybe we don't succeed in making a play and it all falls apart, but that doesn't mean the whole thing's a waste of time. So changing the idea of what's worthwhile, I think, might be helpful.
For sure. I mean, I tend to think of things like problems like climate change in terms of systems and structures and so on. But I guess, the way this intersects with changing those is, Yeah, I mean, people are the moving parts in this, right? So you kind of have to overcome that anxiety and that path dependency and those limitations. And I think just, doing can be empowering, like you say, even if it fails. What the plus I wanted to ask you about is plus beyond just climate change, right? Because this sounds like a weird question because change is such an enormous problem.
Mm.
But these guys will know this is kind of a pet bugaboo of mine, right? Is that what often, certainly within the media, we tend to reduce, or they tend to reduce all environmental problems to climate change. When climate change is really one of a series of interlocking massive environmental problems, biodiversity loss and pollution and habitat destruction. Just as an aside, I was looking at this meta study that tracked, I think it was like 32,000 index populations of species from this huge study, right? So these are key representative species of ecosystem health from like 1970 to 2018. And the aggregate, there'd been like a 70% reduction across them all. So that's basically like a 70% reduction in the amount of life on Earth. It's really kind of like one way to think about it. Now, some of that is due to climate change. It's not really the primary driver, right? Like the primary driver is habitat destruction, over exploitation. 90% of fish stocks are overexploited to the critical level. Anyway, I'm rambling on, but I guess in short, what I wanted to say is, have you thought of framing it beyond just climate change to like other ecological, environmental issues as well?
That's a great question. So speaking for myself, because the name was already there when I came into it, and we never discussed it since I've been there. We've never thought about having a limit to our conversations. I do think they go beyond climate change. Like David Sadoway is having climate noon talks, and if I think about the topics coming up, I don't think they're actually limited. For myself, I'm always trying to find the biggest container I can be in, and so I was part of a conversation with the sustainability office is leading about defining sustainability at KPU. And for me, sustainability, it's kind of like, everything, just how everything connects.
Yeah.
That sounds perfect, because I have a hard time understanding how to make a stop point. Like everything's interconnected. And I think in a way that I have a hard time saying, okay, well, but there's the end point, and that's a category, and I can name that. I don't seem to think that way very easily. So it's hard for me to say, I'm doing this. Here I am, legible to you with my discipline or the topic of my, I don't very easily have a subject matter that I can say, that is what I'm doing. I do a lot more thinking in the relationship between things rather than the things themselves. So for me, yes, let's think about this in the widest way possible. And I don't think that might make it sound like I'm thinking in an amorphous, unpinned down way, but I'm thinking about all the little details in the relationship. It's just hard to name them as a particular thing. Everyone has their own ways of going about things, and so I think it's valuable to have different positionings in that way. But I see your point in not thinking about climate change as disconnected from this wider array of problems or opportunities. For example, for me, I think my way into it is thinking about, well, what is our relationship to the more than human world? How do we conceptualize ourselves as humans? How do we understand ourselves in this enormous network of life?
Right. That's a great point. There's so much there, both in Greg's question and in your response. Like there's so much there. And I mean, like one of the things that just listening, if I can just quickly interject, I can't help myself. Greg, I think was really what I heard in your question was a need to be thinking about what are the underlying forces that are driving ecological destruction on all of these various fronts. So not just like, the industrialized manufacture and release of greenhouse gas emissions, but also habitat loss and soil degradation and like pollution of the oceans and overfishing and like all of the various fronts on which we're at war against nature, it seems, which I think we have to name it as like sort of industrialized capitalism, or just this idea of like continual growth and what the entrenched systems of power that kind of like support that and benefit from those structures, right? in Dale's response, again, so much to pick up on, but one of the points is just how there's a politics in defining what is included and what is excluded in whatever system we're looking at. So as soon as, and this is something I think you're super attentive to. I really appreciate how you're not trying to define climate change as only belonging to a particular set of structures or systems, because like the way in which that those boundaries are drawn is itself kind of political, right? To like name it. And the other thing that came to mind was just like that way of relating to the more than human, which is and seeing the relations between them all. Super important.
Well, I think it also goes, just to jump in, and then I'll let Paula speak. I'm conscious of the fact. Anyway, because we are, a podcast about justice, and I think it goes to the notion of justice, right? Like both in terms of who is responsible or what is responsible for the problem, but then also where does responsibility lie for creating the solutions. And I feel like the mainstream narrative is that we're responsible, right? As individuals, it's with our consumer, it's a lifestyle problem. We have to change our lifestyle. Like that's how climate change is typically addressed in the popular consciousness. But of course, there's no consumption without production. And you hear much less about production. Right? I mean, it was 100 years ago now that Edward Bernays, the father of PR and advertising, wrote and said, look, this system will not sustain itself. Capitalism, he was talking about something that, Karl Marx had realized 50, 60 years earlier or whatever, right? That it will not sustain itself. People won't just buy all the stuff that we're making. We need to manufacture the desire. So there isn't really this, and, I kind of feel like there's often this innate sense that we're responsible when 100 corporations produce 70% of global emissions, and that the solution to that is ultimately a political one. So I guess how does that connect to these two initiatives, which are great and empowering, but can they drive broader political change if that's what's required? I think it is, but others may disagree.
I think that changing how we relate to each other and understand ourselves and expanding our imaginations or opening up new imaginative doors, I think that's important for that political change.
Yeah.
It's not super direct. You can't say I imagine differently now I voted differently, but I think that it does. It's a foundation from which different actions might occur.
Yeah, I think so too. I come off as hostile, but it's not.
Solution would be multifaceted, right?
Yeah.
So looking at both individuals and addressing it at a broader scale.
Yeah.
But that is a wonderful actual lead-in to the next question. Talking about your thoughts really in the role or the place of community building or building community within kind of your multifaceted initiatives. But also, and again, tying into this idea of not only connections and community building, thinking of humans, but also looking at the more than human world maybe and how that's incorporated.
So I moved here not that long ago, and I felt pretty disconnected from the world around me. Like I don't understand the urban situation I live in. I don't know where to find the nice walk through the trees. I just felt like I needed to learn everything about where I am. And I have found that initiatives like this have let me meet more people and then learn more about where I'm at. So I think that in terms of the more than human relationship thing, I think having people to do things with allows more entries into feeling connected to the world around. Like, for example, I've learned with Lee Bevington, he was leading a talk about writing outside, like helping students to write not just in the classroom, but outside. And it led me to ask my students, when and where do you think when you're not just in front of your computer? Like, when do you let your thoughts kind of percolate? And they were like, well, never. I only think when I'm doing it on my computer. And I thought, oh, I didn't know that. Like, that helps me understand how other people are relating to the world around us. That is very different from how I'm relating to it. And I should show them some of the things they can be doing. So for me, the trying to create community. And it's hard at KPU. Everyone is so busy.
Yeah.
We teach so much and we come often from far away and people aren't around. And so I think it's a big difficulty that we face at KPU. So it's something that takes a lot of energy and doesn't work out super well. It gets pretty hard to offer something or to take up an offer to do something that you don't have to do at KPU. That's just kind of like for your own feeling good. So I think that it's important for that very reason that it's harder to do here than at other places. And yeah, so I think the reason I do a lot of things is just because I think it would allow me to hang out with people. Like I just think like I write poems because then I can be like, oh, hello poet, I am also a poet. Now we can know each other. I just think it's like it's an excuse to do things with other people that we're so busy, it's not easy to do it all the time.
It's very easy to stay, if you want, like completely isolated in your cocoon at this place. You do have to make the effort, right?
Yeah.
If you want to connect with other people. Yeah.
Although I'll just point out that the metaphor cocoon is that from which a butterfly emerges.
Oh,
so
okay. So
maybe
you're saying
is that a Freudian?
Yeah.
Stay isolated until you're ready to emerge.
Right. Yeah, could be.
Okay, so I mean, I feel like we're probably getting to the conclusion of this episode. I'm thinking because it's like we've been half an hour in. We've talked about a lot of weighty subjects, and we also all want to, talking about place, go visit the Indigenous scholars and residents who are having an open house at this very time. So we're eager, all of us, to go over and meet them. But I wanted to pose another question that comes to us from our student, Aramayis. What advice do you have for students with a vested interest in climate change in terms of furthering their engagement with environmental issues beyond the classroom?
When I was a student, I only did class. I don't think my university had a lot of other things going on. It was like at university, it was in kind of an isolated place in relation to all of the other universities. So we didn't have a lot of talks or things like that. So maybe I won't blame myself totally, but it was definitely partly that I thought I am focused on getting good grades and that is all I'm going to do. And so I think it's hard, I know, for students because they have jobs and other responsibilities. But I think if they have time, if they can find time to do things that aren't just in class when there's stuff going on at KPU, to take advantage of it. I guess I'm just saying that I wish I had experiences more like the Tracy Guptill experience when I was younger. It took me so long to find out other ways of doing things than the ways I've been doing. Really practically, they could get involved with the Climate Plus Challenge because we have a student group. It's on the website, the WordPress site, if you are looking for more information about that, or you could email me if you can't find it. And
what's your email address?
It's dale.tracy@kpu.ca. So yeah, I think just follow the impulses you have to try something new. And I was also very worried about making mistakes or failing or not achieving something I wanted to achieve. So I think that was not helpful to life or anyone else. So that's not easy because I think our world is structured on not making mistakes and being always productive and perfect, but it's not healthy or good. So I think part of changing that overall relationship we have societally to the environment, the dominant society, the one with the power, I think that changing that attitude to yourself is actually a good start.
Fantastic.
Any follow-up questions from my co-hosts? Any thoughts?
Well, is there anything that you would like to say?
So I have with Lee Bevington, we have created a climate creative writing contest for students. So you could submit your work to that. During the UNSCG week, I'm going to have a collaborative creation session in the Social Justice Lab. March 15th with Renee Saracini Salakar. I'm having another session called, I think, have you ever thought about what the inside of a robot looks like? In which we will read out the first part of the influential 1921 play, R.U.R., Rossum's Universal Robots, and then enact a scenario, each playing a role that taking from that play, but put into present day Metro Vancouver so that we each can try out a conversation as characters and see what emerges.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Paula?
Yeah, now they put me on the spot. And anything else to say? No, I'm just, again, I really appreciate, the wealth of knowledge you've provided us in regards to Climate Plus Challenge and all that students can do and we can do to kind of help facilitate students. I always like adding in sort of action-oriented projects, so things getting students to think about, solutions, even if they're kind of more process-oriented, right? Not looking at that final outcome, but thinking about just kind of what we can do. And I guess going back to that idea of like building connections and relations, if there's anything else you have to inspire us to move forward with that.
I think that it's really helpful to give them the experience in the classroom of working together, because even though that will end almost certainly in the classroom, what I'm seeing with the students right now working out together their ideas about what the plot of this play will be is where we're at right now. And they all have very different ideas, but just they naturally gathered themselves into a circle in the classroom. When I said, okay, it's time to talk about our project, they just got up and moved and then just started. I just sit down and I just don't say anything. And they just lead this discussion together and call on each other and work it out. And I think having that experience of like, oh, we can actually gather and work something out together, that is a transferable skill to solving problems that are not just not creating a play for a classroom, but something that they're trying to do in their lives.
Not individualistic either. Relational.
Relational. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. This was fantastic.